All right. So the book of Isaiah begins, well, number one, where is the book of Isaiah located? Start there. Old Testament. There you go. You're one for one this morning. Great. The book of Isaiah starts what section of our Old Testaments? The major prophets, right. Or just the prophets. We typically delineate major and minor prophets. In the major prophets, who do we have in this list? Isaiah, Jeremiah, don't say Lamentations. Ezekiel, right, there we go. Those are our big major prophets. And they're called major prophets because they're the most important, right? No, why are they called the major prophets? Because they're longer, that's it, right? So you've got Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Daniel will stand apart as being longer than many of the other minor prophets, except for probably Zechariah. And so just realize these are kind of artificial terms that we give to these major and minor prophets. Isaiah, what does the name Isaiah mean?
Jehovah saves.
Jehovah saves, right? And going with the theme that names, and particularly names of Bible characters and names of Bible books, mean something, what might that tell us about the theme and the nature of the book of Isaiah? How does the name Isaiah fit the book? He's going to talk about salvation. He's going to talk about salvation in two senses. What are the two senses? There's going to be this ultimate salvation that's going to come through the Messiah, right? And then there's the possibility of salvation that's being extended to whom? Israel, not necessarily in a spiritual sense, but in a physical sense, right? Because as Isaiah is prophesying, and you can look here at the very beginning of the book of Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 1, what is the time frame for Isaiah's prophecies? What's given to us here in chapter 1? I'm not looking for years, so don't worry.
Well, during the destruction or prior to the destruction?
Okay. Prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, right? Who are our kings that are mentioned here? Uzziah. And Uzziah was quite possibly also had what other name? It sometimes makes things confusing. Azariah. That's right. Uzziah or Azariah. Okay. And then who's our next king mentioned? Jotham, and then Ahaz and Hezekiah, right? And out of these, we're probably most familiar with Uzziah and with Hezekiah, the bookends of this reign, right? Uzziah is going to be the king that tried to go into where? Remember? He tries to go into restricted parts of the temple. What happens to him? Struck with leprosy, that's right. And then you've got Hezekiah. Of course, what's significant about Hezekiah?
15 extra years.
Yeah, he prays to God, humbles himself, gets the 15 extra years of life. Josh, what else is significant about Hezekiah?
During those extra 15 years, the bad king.
Yeah, a child's going to be born to him in these extra years of life, but that child is whom? Manasseh, that's right, who is going to be listed as the cause, or sins in his reign as the cause, ultimately, for Judah going off into captivity. Hezekiah is also the one who showed the Babylonians the treasures of his house, right? Remember, Josh preached about that not too long ago. All right, so if you're looking for a time frame chronology on a timeline, Uzziah's reign begins somewhere around 765 BC. And Hezekiah's reign concludes around 685 BC. Okay? And I know that's hard to picture on that timeline that we've used previously. Here's the important thing to note. What year does the southern kingdom go off into captivity or begin to go off into captivity? You remember? 606 is going to be the first time that Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon come against the southern kingdom. That's in 606. But here is Hezekiah's reign that ends in 685 BC. So we are not yet to the destruction or even the initial carrying off of the southern kingdom. Okay? Northern kingdom, however, northern kingdom of Israel goes off into captivity at whose hand? the hand of the Assyrians, right? And do you remember what year that happens? 722 BC. 722 BC is when the Assyrians are going to overrun the northern kingdom. And so, during the midst of Isaiah's prophecy is when the northern kingdom is going to go off into captivity. There are going to be some references to that about unfaithful Israel and how Judah needs to make sure that she does not follow the example of Israel. But of course, we know the rest of the story, and that's going to be exactly what does happen. As you look at chapter 1 and verse 2 in the book of Isaiah, here's how the book begins. Listen, O heavens, and hear, O earth, for the Lord speaks. Sons I have reared and brought up, but they have revolted against me. An ox knows its owner, and a donkey its master's manger, but Israel does not know, my people do not understand. Alas, sinful nation, people weighed down with iniquity, offspring of evildoers, sons who act corruptly. They have abandoned the Lord, they have despised the Holy One of Israel, they have turned away from him. Where will you be stricken again as you continue in your rebellion? The whole head is sick and the whole heart is faint. From the sole of the foot even to the head there is nothing sound in it, only bruises and welts and raw wounds, not pressed out or bandaged, nor softened with oil. Your land is desolate, your cities are burned with fire, your fields, strangers are devouring them in your presence. It is desolation as overthrown by strangers. The daughter of Zion is left like a shelter in a vineyard, like a watchman's hut in a cucumber field, like a besieged city. Unless the Lord of hosts had left us a few survivors, we would be like Sodom. We would be like Gomorrah. Now, you come to verse 18, and there's what in verse 18? There's hope. There's hope for this nation that has fallen. There is hope. So come and let us reason together. Listen to my words. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they will be like wool. If you consent and obey, you will eat the best of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you will be devoured by the sword. Truly the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Okay. Here's one thing that can make the prophets section of the Old Testament somewhat difficult for us. As you come back to chapter 1 and verse 3, who does Isaiah say he is speaking about? Israel. But as you look at chapter 1 and verse 1, Isaiah's prophecies are very clearly directed towards whom? Judah. And so we're here scratching our heads. Are we talking about Israel or are we talking about Judah? And the answer is? Yes. The answer is yes, right? Because what makes this confusing a little bit is that Judah can also be called what? Israel. Judah can also be called Israel. All right? Because Israel is just the name for what? It's sometimes the name for the northern kingdom, and it's sometimes just simply the name for God's chosen people, the descendants of Israel. And who was Israel? Remember? Jacob. That's right. Okay? So, here's something, though, in the context that can help us. Verse 8. Who are we talking about? Verse 8 says? Daughter of Zion. Okay? Zion was a hill, a mountain, connected with what city? Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was a part of northern kingdom, southern kingdom. Southern kingdom, that would be Judah. Okay? As well, look at chapter 1 and verse 21. How the faithful what? City. When you're thinking even about Israel, when you're thinking about a city, what's the first city that comes to mind? That's going to be Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was a part of Southern Kingdom, Judah, right? I understand it can be very difficult to peg. Sometimes are we talking about Northern Kingdom Israel? Are we talking about the United Kingdom Israel? Are we talking about the Southern Kingdom that is usually called Judah, but is sometimes called Israel? I get that can be challenging. Look for these sorts of clues in the context to help kind of alleviate that difficulty. I think Isaiah is talking here about the Southern Kingdom. The Southern Kingdom, just like the Northern Kingdom, has gone off into apostasy. they're being called back. God is trying to reason with them. God is trying to get them to listen, to consent to him, to obey, and to turn from their wickedness. So he's going to use Isaiah the prophet to accomplish this. Look back to 1 Samuel chapter 9 and verse 9. Primero de Samuel capítulo 9, verso 9. 1 Samuel chapter 9 and verse 9. What was the function of a prophet? Just at its ground level, what was the function of a prophet? To reveal the will of God. To take the message that God has and to deliver it. Sometimes that message had to do with what? Future. And that's often what we associate prophets with, right? They're talking about the future. But that's not required in this word prophet, because sometimes prophets are talking about what? The present. And even sometimes they're talking about what? Learning lessons from this. I mean, what two cities did Isaiah just mention in chapter 1? Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's what? That's past, okay? So prophets are not strictly concerned with being foretellers, right? But they are forthtellers. They are sending forth the message of God, whatever message that might be. You look here at 1 Samuel chapter 9 and verse 9. Formerly in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, he used to say, "Come and let us go to the seer, for he who was called a prophet now was formerly called a seer." But you went to the seer or the prophet when you were trying to inquire of God. So simply, one who would share this message from God was called a seer or called a prophet. And coincidentally, verse 9, Israel, is this northern kingdom Israel, southern kingdom Israel, or what? They're not split yet, right? We know that contextually because who's about to be king here? Saul is, right? Okay? Kingdom hadn't split yet. So you use these kinds of clues to help you understand what we're talking about when we're talking about Israel, Judah, anything like that. All right, so back to the book of Isaiah. How many chapters does the book of Isaiah have? Hurry up and flip to the back of the book if you can't remember. 66, that's right. Why is that significant? Why is that noteworthy? What did you say, Brother Trim? Okay, 39 and 27, and you put those together and you get 66. Sometimes you will hear Isaiah referred to as the Little Bible. Our English Bibles have 66 books in them. Old Testament has 39, New Testament has 27. And when you look at the book of Isaiah, you can almost divide up the book of Isaiah in the same way. Look at Isaiah 39. Capítulo 39, Isaiah 39. At the end of Isaiah 39, you have the end, at least this point, in the story of the life of Hezekiah. Verses 7 and 8, versos 7 y 8. Some of your sons who will issue from you, whom you will beget, will be taken away, and they will become officials in the palace of the king of Babylon. Then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, "The word of the Lord which you have spoken is good," for he thought, "For there will be peace and truth in my days." And then chapter 40 begins just a completely different line of reasoning, doesn't it? We leave the biography behind. We're no longer concerned with Hezekiah and the future of his house. And it's 40 in verse 1, "Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak kindly to Jerusalem and call out to her that her warfare has ended, that her iniquity has been removed, that she has received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice is calling, clear the way for the Lord in the wilderness, make smooth in the desert a highway for our God." Now, that verse particularly right there, does that sound familiar? Isaiah 40 and verse 3?
Yes.
Smooth out a highway and all of that. Where do we hear that? Why is that familiar to our ears?
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist, right? We have this applied to John the Baptist. Matthew, Mark, Luke, I think John even mentions it too. I think all four gospel accounts seize on this idea of calling out this highway, making it straight, clearing the way for the Lord in the wilderness. We're talking about the coming of whom in Isaiah 40? The coming of Christ and John the Baptist leading the way. Do you see a division between chapters 39 and 40? Right? This is some of why you will see Isaiah called the Little Bible. Because after book 39 in our Bibles, book 40 begins the gospel accounts. And here in chapter 40, you certainly see a dramatic messianic shift. That's not to say that we don't see things about the Messiah before chapter 40. It's not to say that we don't see anything about national Israel after chapter 40, because we do. But it's going to be after chapter 40 that we really start to see more of a focus on the Messiah, on his work, and on spiritual Israel. And that's going to be a lot of Isaiah's focus. Which gospel account is going to mention Isaiah most frequently? This was a tough one. I gave you no hints about this. Matthew. Matthew does. Why would it make sense that Matthew would be the one who references Isaiah the most?
The Jewish audience.
All right, he has a Jewish audience, right? Matthew chapter 1 and verse 1. Mateo capítulo 1, verso 1. As Matthew starts his gospel account at the very beginning, he identifies Jesus as being the son of two different people. Who are they? Son of David, son of Abraham. You begin a gospel account that way if your gospel account is focused towards what group of people? Towards Jews, okay? And if you are writing to Jews in the first century who have a very heightened messianic expectation, what book in your Old Testament is going to focus the most on the Messiah? It's going to be Isaiah. And coincidentally, when we're going to encounter Jesus in the synagogue early on in his ministry, and he's going to read publicly in the synagogue from the Old Testament, where in the Old Testament he's going to read from? He's going to read from Isaiah. People in the first century, Jewish people in the first century, had a very, very close relationship with the book of Isaiah. And that comes out in the New Testament. That's why you're going to see such frequent references to Isaiah throughout the New Testament. Why would it not make sense for Luke to have the most Isaiah references? Greek audience. Luke was a Gentile and probably writing towards a Gentile audience. Why would it not make sense for Mark to have a lot of Isaiah references? Action, gospel of action, right? He is focusing on what Jesus is doing. And why would it not make sense for John to have the most Isaiah references? Well, his gospel account is just completely different than the other three, isn't it? You have what are called the synoptic gospels, which means the same eye, the same vision. That's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John's is a little bit different. One man has explained it this way. The first three gospel accounts talk about the life of Jesus, and John's gospel account kind of dissects the life of Jesus or interprets the life of Jesus. Matthew, it's not surprising that he would have the most Isaiah references. I want you to turn over there real quick and notice something with me. Matthew chapter 4, Mateo capítulo 4. Mike, you had your hand up. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say that if you was studying the book of Isaiah and inquired of Stephen, was it Stephen? Right? No.
Philip.
Philip. And who is this that you? I mean, it seemed to be a gateway into introducing Christ to people and preaching the gospel.
I think you are correct about that. You there with me in Matthew chapter 4? I want you to look there with me at over here to verse 14. Mateo capítulo 4, verso 14. So this is after the temptation of Jesus. And it says in verse 14, this was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people who were sitting in darkness saw a great light, and those who were sitting in the land and shadow of death, upon them a light dawned. So here is Jesus teaching, going to this area teaching. Matthew says he is doing all of this to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. And then Matthew notes that at that time Jesus began to preach and say what? Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So these two ideas are joined together, right? This darkness coming upon, or this light coming upon those who sat in darkness, is connected with what Jesus is saying here in verse 17. Repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And then, the very next time we're going to hear the kingdom of heaven mentioned is where? It's going to be in chapter 5. Chapter 5 and verse 3. The very first what? The very first beatitude. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Why? Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I think you're taking all of this, and it's... You ever struggled with the Beatitudes before? Trying to make sense of them and where they fit in and what all's going on. For example, verse 4 is Jesus just telling us, hey, if you're a weepy, cryy person, you're blessed. When you see the Isaiah context here from Matthew's gospel account, and you make that connection back to chapter 4, from Isaiah's prophecy, and then repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and then here's the kingdom of heaven, and blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We're seeing a very spiritual slant to what's going on here. What Jesus is talking about in the Beatitudes is his people, his kingdom, the kind of people that find a place in his kingdom, and the characteristics of the people who are in his kingdom. And this is the very thing that Isaiah was talking about. Here are the people who were once in darkness, but now they've seen a great light, and that great light has changed them, and here's what they look like. And that's what we're seeing in Matthew, that's what we're seeing in the Beatitudes, but you're getting all of that from the foundation of Isaiah. So let's get to our thought questions here this morning. Let's go over to Isaiah 13. Isaías. I always struggle with that one. Isaías, capítulo 13. Against whom is Isaiah prophesying? Babylon. Well, let me get through the question. Yes, you're right, Brother Rose. I know, I'm getting there. Against whom is Isaiah prophesying? Why are they going to be judged? God would judge this nation through whom, and what does secular history reveal about this episode? All right, so Isaiah 13, the oracle concerning, this is chapter 13 and verse 1, Babylon, okay? Anyone's translation say something there in chapter 13 and verse 1 besides oracle? Burden. Burden or announcement, okay? Leslie, what translation is that? King James, that's what I was going to say. Oftentimes when you come to these sections of prophecies where they are prophecies against nations, oftentimes they're going to be described as burdens. Burdens because these are heavy prophecies to share. Because if you're a prophet who is sharing this message to an audience that might not like what you have to say, what is within the realm of possibility of happening to you? Off with your head, right? Okay, so here's the burden against Babylon. Lift up a standard on the bare hill, raise your voice to them, wave the hand that they may enter the doors of the nobles. I have commanded my consecrated ones, I have even called my mighty warriors to execute my anger. Verse 5, to destroy the whole land. Verse 6, wait for the what? So here is judgment coming against Babylon, and it's described as what? Day of the Lord. You're going to see that phrase used repeatedly in the Old Testament, Day of the Lord. And it does not exclusively refer to 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 9, the day of the Lord will so come as a thief in the night. Just generally speaking, throughout the Old Testament, the day of the Lord was what? It was a day of judgment. Not the day of ultimate and final and everlasting judgment, but these days of judgment that we read about in the past lay the groundwork then for when we get to 2 Peter 3 and we're confronted by this ultimate, final day of judgment. All right, so Brother Roach, we've got this prophecy against Babylon. In verse 11, why is Babylon going to be judged?
For their wickedness and their iniquity.
There you go. I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will also put an end to the arrogance of the proud and abase the haughtiness of the ruthless. Who is God going to judge the Babylonians by? Verse 17, behold, I am going to stir up the Medes against them, who will not value silver, will take pleasure in gold, and their bows will mow down the young men. They will not even have compassion on the fruit of the womb. Of course, this is going to be described in Daniel chapter 2. It's going to be described, I believe, also in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8. 2 Chronicles 36 is going to give us somewhat of a historical account of this. And of course, what does secular history reveal about this? This is just Isaiah's prophecy back in the mid-700s. What does secular history reveal? Bill, that it happened, and it happened when? 606 BC is when Babylon is going to come against Israel for the first time. And do you remember how long God was going to keep Israel in Babylonian captivity? 70 years, okay? You come to around about 536 BC, and what happens to the Babylonian Empire? It falls. And it falls to whom? Medes and the Persians. Do you remember Daniel telling this story in the book of Daniel? Who was the last king of this Babylonian Empire? Belshazzar. What's he doing when we see him in the book of Daniel at the very end of the Babylonian Empire? What is he doing?
Toasting to the gods of silver and gold.
Okay. And he's throwing a what? Huge party. Everybody's getting drunk. And to this bunch of drunk people, God does what?
Writes on the wall.
And how does he write on the wall? This is God having a sense of humor. To everybody who is plastered, God sends a disembodied hand down. And the disembodied hand starts writing on the wall. And he writes what? Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. You've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Kingdom's going to be taken from you. All of that. That very night, who sneaks into the Babylonian capital? The Medes do. You read secular history about this. They're going to come up through one of the water channels that was in the city. And normally you have guards there, and normally you have gates there that are locked and shut and prevent anyone from entering in. However, in this drunken stupor that had overtaken Belshazzar's palace, what had they neglected to do? Lock the doors. Look at, I think it's Isaiah 45. Flip over there real quick. This is just kind of cool how it all fits together. Look at Isaiah 45. Isaiah 45 and verse 1. Thus says the Lord to Cyrus, his anointed. Who was Cyrus? Leader of the Medes and the Persians. Okay. Cyrus was co-regent along with whom? Hootie and the Blowfish lead singer? Darius, Darius, Darush. Take your pick. There you go. I got you on that one, didn't I? Yeah. Thus says the Lord to Cyrus, his anointed, whom I have taken by the right hand to subdue nations before him, to loose the loins of kings, to open doors before him so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you and make the rough places smooth. I will shatter the doors of bronze and cut through their iron bars. I will give you the treasures of darkness and hidden wealth of secret places, so that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who calls your name. This whole business here about gates being opened and things like that, that's exactly how the Medes and the Persians entered into Babylon. Through gates that were left unlocked. That's what secular history records. It's just interesting. Here is Isaiah 150 years before this happens, prophesying exactly who will overtake Babylon, why Babylon is going to fall, and then later, in Isaiah 45, the means by which they're going to overtake Babylon. And oh, by the way, the person who is going to be leading the invading army to overtake Babylon, and we're going to call him out by name. And all of this 150 years before it happens. So, picture yourself back in the early 90s. It's Christmas time. Your family is gathered around eating popcorn. And you were at the cinema watching John Hughes' newest film, Home Alone 2. Kevin McAllister is making his way through New York. He's at the Plaza Hotel. He needs to find a phone, and because we're back in the 90s, not everyone has a phone in their pocket. He needs to go to the phone bank. He doesn't know where the phone bank is. Some of us are scratching our heads, what is a phone bank? And a gentleman points him in the right direction. Who points him towards the phone bank in the Plaza Hotel? Donald Trump. Now that was 1993, I think, 92, 93. And we're in, let's call it 2016, the election, okay? Call it 30 years. In 92, did you ever think Donald Trump would be president of the United States of America? Okay. Which makes what Isaiah does here not 30 years in advance, but 150 years in advance. By calling the name of a foreign leader and the way in which he's going to take over Babylon, by naming all of that in detail. That should speak to us. That should tell us something about the nature of this prophet, the nature of his prophecies, and the nature of the God who was inspiring him to make these prophecies. And that's just exactly as history tells us. That's just exactly what happened. The Babylonians fall to the Medes and the Persians. And of course, Cyrus and Darius will issue a decree shortly thereafter for all the Jews who are in captivity to do what? Anyone that wants to go back and rebuild Jerusalem. And that takes us to the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. All right, look at Isaiah 13 and verse 10. Capítulo 13, verso 10. So we're still here in the context of Isaiah 13, still here in the context of Babylon going to fall. They're being judged. Here is this burden against Babylon. And in the midst of this day of the Lord language, we see chapter 13 and verse 10, and we read this. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Do we ever see that kind of language again in the Bible? We see that language in Matthew 24. We do. Jesus is going to talk about the sun not giving its light, the moon into blood, stars not shining. We're going to see that language there. Matthew 24 and Mark 13. Anywhere else we're going to see that language? Joel 2. Okay. And it's going to be quoted in Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2 and verse 20. You're going to see it in Revelation chapter 8 and verse 12. Okay. This is a type of language that is going to be used repeatedly in the New Testament. Look at two of these instances with me. Look at Matthew chapter 24. Mateo capítulo 24. Matthew chapter 24. Verse 29, verso 29. So we're in the context in Matthew 24 of verse 34. Verse 34 is kind of a dividing line in Matthew 24. Verse 34, this generation will not pass away until all these things, what he has just spoken, till all of these things take place. And then you get verse 36, a different day. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels, nor the Son, but the Father alone. So you've got two sections to Matthew 24. After verse 34 and before verse 34. In this section before verse 34, I believe Jesus is describing the destruction of Jerusalem. Judgment that is coming on Jerusalem. Judgment, just like Isaiah 13, judgment was coming upon Babylon. And look how it's described in verse 29. Look at Matthew 24, verse 29, verso 29. How was this judgment against Jerusalem described? Anybody who's brave enough to read or say something out loud? Okay. The sun will be darkened. The moon will fail to give its light. The stars will fall from heaven. The powers of heaven will be shaken. Is that not just almost exactly what we just read in Isaiah 13? So did we lose all the stars in heaven back in Isaiah 13? They regrew, and then we lost them again in Matthew 24. They regrew, but spoiler alert, we're going to lose them all again in Acts chapter 2 and verse 20, and then that's kind of it. No. This language about the sun into darkness, the moon into blood, the moon into darkness, the stars from heaven falling, this is all language that is associated with what concept? Judgment. This is what is called judgment language or apocalyptic language. It is language that is bombastic. It is, what's our H word I'm looking for? Hyperbole. Yes, it's hyperbole. Right? If the sun went dark, if the sun literally went dark, not talking about an eclipse, that's not what he's describing here. If the sun literally went dark, what would happen?
Everything dies.
We would die. Okay? Obviously, since life is continuing, the sun did not what? It didn't literally go dark. So what is he meaning here? Isaiah 13, this is judgment. Matthew 24, this is judgment. Acts 2, this is judgment. So when you see it in Revelation 8, what is being communicated by this? Judgment. This is one way in which the prophets express the idea of God's judgment that was coming. Look at chapter 14 in Isaiah. Isaías capítulo 14. Now, what's the strange reference we get here in Isaiah 14? Is there a name here in Isaiah 14 that... Keep going past Jacob. Yeah, where do you get that, Todd? Verse 12. Depending on the translation you're reading from. Verse 12, how you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn, you have been cut down to the earth, you have weakened to the nation. Some translations instead of saying star of the morning, son of the dawn, will say what? Lucifer. And boy, that's just a jumping off point there. Because somebody asks the question, and it's a good question, hey, where did Satan come from? And too often folks flip where? To Isaiah 14 and say, aha, Lucifer. Well, everybody knows Lucifer is Satan. And so here's the origin story for Satan. And I don't doubt the sincerity of folks who would make that argument. However, look over here to verse 20. Verso 20. And read with me the next few verses. Here's Isaiah 14 and verse 20. You will not be united with them in burial because you have ruined your country. You have slain your people. May the offspring of evildoers not be mentioned forever. Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers. They must not arise and take possession of the earth and fill the face of the world with cities. I will arise against them, declares the Lord of hosts, and will cut off from Babylon name and survivors, offspring and posterity, declares the Lord. I will also make it a possession for the hedgehog and swamps of water, and I will sweep it with the broom of destruction, declares the Lord. In Isaiah 14, what are we still talking about? We're still talking about Babylon. Who is Lucifer in Isaiah 14? It's a king of Babylon. It may be Nebuchadnezzar. It may be Belshazzar, but it's one of these kings of Babylon. Isaiah 14 is not talking about whom? It's not Satan's origin story. And we understand that by reading the rest of the context of the passage here. Jimmy, we just had the first bell, didn't we? We're about to get the second one. So Isaiah 25 and verse 8 sounds very similar to Revelation 7 and Revelation 21 and verse 4. The idea of tears being wiped away from eyes. And in question number 5, where in Isaiah was Jesus reading in Luke 4? He's reading from Isaiah 61. Those prophecies are about him, giving sight to the blind, being with the poor, the brokenhearted, and the captive. And these are all descriptions of people who are captive by sin. Appreciate your good attention and your input this morning. Thank you.